We make our tofu from whole soybeans. We use dried soybeans, and our soybeans, currently we get our soybeans from the Midwest. Now we use a non-GMO soybean, which is a non-genetically modified organism, um, which essentially is just a traditional type of process. They do use fertilizer and they do use pesticides, just not, in excess of it. And a little background, there are three grades of soybeans. One is, of course, the non-GMO, which we use. There's GMO, which has been genetically modified to basically grow in certain conditions. And then the last is organic. Organic is plants that have been raised or crops that have been developed without the use of herbicides, pesticides, chemicals, basically. Organic, very expensive. The cheapest would be GMO. So we're in the mid-range right now. But we get the dried soybeans. And the process essentially is we take the dried soybeans and we put them in holding tanks. Water is added with a timer overnight. And essentially they'll soak, in Hawaii at least, they'll soak about 8 hours. So overnight.
Is this a proportion, maybe like 1 to 10, something like that?
In terms of water?
Yeah.
We don't, there's no measurement.
Oh.
We just fill up the tank full.
Okay.
And there's a certain limit, because what happens is soybeans will soak up the water and they'll double in size. Double, almost triple in size, actually. And they'll just basically get rehydrated. And the reason for that is we can't process the dried soybeans because they're too hard. By rehydrating them, rehydrating them, we allows it to get soft and it's easier to process, basically. Then from there, we'll drain out the water the next day, and we'll use those hydrated soybeans. We'll drop it into a grinder, adding some water. And what the grinder will do is it'll make a fine slurry, kind of a slush. If you think in terms of like a kind of a runny oatmeal, it's kind of that texture. And that slurry has everything in it. So the husk, the meat inside, the eye of the soybean, everything. From there, we're going to cook that slurry for about 35 to 45 minutes. And the reason for that is soybeans are interesting. They're a very good source of protein, probably the most complete outside of meat in terms of vegetables and plants. But they also contain what is called a trypsin inhibitor. Trypsin inhibitor, what that does is if you eat raw soybeans, humans, if you eat raw soybeans, it will interfere with your digestion. So one point that I make to groups is that if you're going to eat something like edamame, which is the soybeans in the pods, or anything, tofu or whatever, just make sure it's cooked. Normally, during the process of making tofu, it'll be cooked well enough. You won't have to worry about these things. Sometimes people have problems with soy because they feel it gives them gas. I don't know if I can say that, but and the reason for that is probably most likely due to the trypsin inhibitors not being deactivated in the process. And so by heating it deactivates these chemicals. From there, after the slurry is cooked, we're going to separate out the solids, or the okara, the soybean meal, from the soy milk. The okara, the soybean meal, is collected and it gets sent to a pig farmer. And the milk is the product, the part that we use to make the tofu. So we take the soy milk, it's still very hot, and we put it into these stainless steel barrels where a coagulant is added. Now, the coagulant that we use is a combination of calcium sulfate and nigari. Nigari is the Japanese name for a product called magnesium chloride. We're very fortunate. We actually get our nigari from the Big Island, from Kona, and they
How
have.
do you acquire that?
We
What is it made from?
okay. Nigari, basically, and you kind of have to use your imagination here, is derived mostly from salt manufacturing, natural salt manufacturing. And if you have, like, say, a bucket of water and you want to make seawater, and you want it to make salt naturally, so you would let the water evaporate, and you would have some salt crystals. The salt would still be a little bit wet. It's still maintaining moisture. So you have to spread the salt out. Now, there are some other, I guess, heavier liquids that drip down. And that is the nigari. So if you can imagine seawater without water and salt, whatever is left over is nigari, the magnesium chloride. There are some other trace minerals as well, but for the most part, it's magnesium chloride that's in there. Now, this magnesium chloride is also very interesting because it has a very bitter taste, and just by itself, you wouldn't think you would want to use that type of product. But what happens is when you add the nigari to soy milk, and I don't know exactly how this came about, but when you do that, it coagulates the soy milk very well, and it also gives it a I like to say that it brings out the sweetness of the soybeans. Not so much sweetness in terms of sugar, but like a plant sweetness. So the flavor of the soybeans comes out a lot more. And Japanese love their nigari in their tofu. They use it. That's like their main coagulant. For us, we use a combination because it's a little bit easier to work with. When I was teaching my workers how to make tofu, and it's worked out pretty well. They've done pretty well. I think gradually we'll try to continue to increase the amount of nigari we use because of the flavor that it brings out from the soybeans. So after you have the soy milk, you added the coagulant, you've mixed it, and the mixing takes place very quickly, and you let it sit. After about 6 minutes, the soy milk has coagulated, and you get kind of this custardy, very light, very fluffy, kind of textured curds, basically. And those curds are the things that we use to make the tofu. So the curds are then broken up. This is for the firm tofu, and they're scooped into these form boxes, and from there they're covered and a weight is added, and they go through our pneumatic presses.
What about the water left behind? You use that?
The water gets separated out from the tofu during the pressing period.
When you scoop the curds out, what about the water? And do you use it for anything?
We don't.
Oh.
Although there are people who do like to use that leftover. I guess it's the whey. If you think of a cheese making curds and whey, very similar. We press out the whey and it goes down the drain. Whereas cheese manufacturers, they'll use that whey product and dry it out and use it as another product. We've never gone that far. In fact, I don't know any tofu manufacturer that does. For whatever reason, I don't know. But yeah, it just gets squeezed out, goes down the drain. That's it. Yeah. If you have an opportunity to taste the tofu right after it's coagulated, to me that is the real true taste of tofu. You have everything in there still. Nothing is pressed out. And also the texture is very nice. It's again like a very light custard. um, after it goes through um, the presses gradually increase in pressure and squeeze out most of the way the water. It comes out on the other end and it pops out, and we take off the weight, we take off the cloth. We have a little stand whereby the tofu gets pressed up through the false bottom in the form boxes. And we take that big block of tofu. It takes 2 men to carry it. Um, and they put it into a cooling tank.
How much does it weigh?
How much does it weigh?
It's just awkward. It's not so much the weight.
It would be a challenge for one person to do. Yeah, part of it is because of the size and the shape of it, but also I'm sorry, but also the weight itself is would be a challenge. So I don't know if you want to try carrying
No.
it.
No.
I'm not exactly sure actually. After it's put into the cooling tank, we have a board that floats in the water and supports the block of tofu. And then we'll cut it in the water. So we'll cut it into its individual pieces. So one big block of tofu will make 36 smaller blocks or regular sized blocks of tofu. Then that gets cut, that gets floated into the water, and it gets left in the water to cool down. At the other end of the tank, we have the employees packaging the tofu. So the tofu is packaged into its individual containers. After we fill up a table, then we push the table out to the packing machine. Goes through the packing machine into the trays, and the trays are iced down. Then they're pushed into our refrigerators, the walk-in reefers, and there they sit overnight until the delivery drivers come in the next day. And then they're taken to the store. And that's basically the process from the dry soybeans to the final product.